So a couple of years ago it was Frank Clark, and last year it was Orlando Brown. Who's it going to be?
Deebo Samuel. Yeah. No, we
What did you just say to me?
All right, Brett Veach had his presser with the media yesterday regarding the draft and many angles of their prep for it this offseason, including free agency with players like Tyrann Mathieu, trades like Tyreek Hill, and the OBJ franchise tag, among other things. And his presser was around 35 minutes, so my goal is to condense it down to a much more palatable time, give a summary along with some of my thoughts along the way. But first, how about those? What's up, everybody? My name is Cole, and I do daily news about the Chiefs and the NFL overall, so make sure to sub if you're new, hit that like button, and let's get into this Brett Veach media presser. He sits down and immediately starts thanking the coaching staff for all their hard work, explaining how wild it's been for them and the staff with having 12 draft picks to prepare for, so it's more guys to prepare for than ever, and now they are basically back to the normal operations in the lead up to the draft. For example, the last 2 years with COVID have basically been Zoom meetings and watching tape, but now you have the combine, pro days, top 30 visits, in-house visits, coaches traveling, working players, and all that. So it's been a bit of a blur for them thus far, yet they are excited for this year's draft. And the joke that I played earlier about Veach mentioning Deebo Samuel as the next big swing for the Chiefs seemed very tongue-in-cheek to me, obviously, because right after that, he said they are excited about their current roster talent and also the prospects in the draft, and that he feels they've shown every indication of where they are going with this thing. They want to build through the draft, especially with all the picks and flexibility they have this go round. He's excited to get young and get deeper on both sides of the football, and Veach mentioned that it's all a balancing act as veteran players provide leadership and off the field intangibles that you can't put a price on, but also with age often comes injuries or players being more susceptible to injury. So yes, definitely a balancing act there. And speaking of veterans, he was asked about Tyrann Mathieu and why the organization appeared to want to re-sign him on the outside, yet sign Justin Reid instead, and seemed to let Tyrann just walk right into free agency. Well, Veach responded saying they had broad concept discussions with him prior to last season, or actually last preseason, but called it basically a long shot even in those discussions because those discussions were geared toward team-friendly deals and what would make sense to the Chiefs overall. Then the season happened and things became more tricky as they had some hurdles with contracts and players on the team, such as franchise tagging Orlando Brown Jr. and stuff like that. So they had to shift, and he said pivot quickly. And that looks to me why Justin Reid is here now. Tyrann said he would have taken Justin Reid's deal, but would he have really? I mean, Veach made it sound like here that based on those preliminary discussions with Tyrann and his team, they didn't think they could get a deal that team-friendly done with Tyrann, so that's why Reid is here now. Veach was asked about the possibility, though, of a Honey Badger return if Tyrann doesn't find something he likes in free agency, and Brett said anything is on the table. They certainly wouldn't close the door to that because of the respect and love that they have for him, but I don't know. I mean, I guess you could never say never, but I don't see that scenario extremely likely unless Tyrann comes back on a shorter, cheaper deal simply because he doesn't find anything else palatable to him in free agency and just wants to return to the team that he's been on. We'll see. The reporters shifted from Tyrann to Tyreek, how the trade came about, and if it impacted the offseason plan. Basically, the big contract signings by other receivers this offseason played a big role. They felt if they paid Tyreek that much, they'd be limiting their resources on what they could do on the defensive side of the ball, which is where they needed to get a lot of work done. So they took a step back and felt the best course of action after evaluating over the course of the weeks was to allow him to seek a trade and get the kind of contract he wanted elsewhere. And I found that interesting, though, because he mentioned signing a veteran pass rusher, but they didn't want to sign a veteran pass rusher to honor Tyreek when trying to get his extension done, but then they traded him off and still didn't sign a veteran pass rusher. So I don't know, maybe they missed on the guys they wanted to by the time the trade happened. Who knows? But it was a bit odd to me, yet here we are. He said the fact that they have Pat Mahomes will always keep them in the fight, so trading away a great player doesn't take them out of said fight. yet he's looking to counter and be aggressive in other ways. And flexibility is the key word he used. Year in and year out, that's the key. Sometimes they will see more faith in relying on the draft. Some years there will be circumstances that come up in free agency that you just can't pass up and will be aggressive there. But he's learned to take it year by year. And this year, it seems they are relying on the draft more than anything else. Orlando Brown Jr. was the next chief up for discussion, and Veach gave an update on the franchise tag situation with him. Basically, they started discussions with him earlier, but Orlando Brown is taking a step back to figure out if he wants to negotiate with an agent or wants to do it himself. And I think Orlando is sort of also wanting to see other deals that get done this offseason and evaluating where the market will be as far as left tackles are concerned. But Veach gave the example of Chris Jones, saying his deal got done right near the end. So right now they are focusing up on the draft and will be more than happy to sit down and talk with OBJ when he is ready. He then gave a couple injury updates, saying he's not sure of the exact process of Jody Fortson yet, but should find out more soon. And then he said that Lucas Niang was recently flown in for an updated MRI, and things are looking where they need to be and on par with a potential return by the end of training camp. From there, Veach focused on the draft and their picks, saying they have around 16 to 18 first-round names on their board and about 194 total on their board covering every round, but that number will probably narrow a bit as they get even closer to the draft. But yeah, he says that having picks 29 and 30 in the first round, the odds of landing one of their 16 to 18 first round names aren't extremely high. Teams have deviated in the past though. He's talking about like teams that go for quarterbacks or something that they weren't expecting, which has opened things up for them in the back half of round one. So if some names are still on the board for pick 19, 20, 21, Veach says it may then be worth finding a trade partner and moving up to grab one. But if those names are all off the board, they will more than likely stay put and collect the assets they can. Either way, he's real excited of the value of the draft, specifically for picks 30 through 60. That's where they got Creed Humphrey and Nick Bolton last year, both top-notch starters on the team. And that's where he feels they will find a lot of value this year as well. And he even sounded like he was open to the idea of trading back with one of their first rounders to get more picks in that 30 to 60 range. He seems to think if that scenario plays out, it'll be a team that reaches out about a late first round QB that they want, and a fifth-year option is very important to them. And the Chiefs would be a likely option because they have 2 first-round picks back-to-back. So that really goes to show how much Veach really values that pocket of the draft. Super late first round and second round. Veach says they have their eyes on some receivers, even though they feel the receiving core as a whole is a good spot going into the draft.
If there's a receiver that makes sense in obviously in any of these rounds, but I think when you have Kelsey and a guy like Juju, I think you have a really good advantages and matchups in the intermediate game, and certainly McColl and Marquez can stretch the field. Clyde's healthy. This is the first full offseason he's going to have, and then you throw in a guy that we really liked in the process a few years ago in Rojo that we think he adds another element. And so, I mean, we feel really good about our skill players.
He specifically mentions that there is opportunity to add some more O-line depth.
Offensive line depth is good in this draft, so we feel like we can add depth and youth there, and well, I mean, we'll certainly always look to add skill and talent around Pat.
So I'd be expecting some later round O-line additions as well as later round running backs, or at least one. He actually brought up running backs unprompted and said there is a ton of valuable running backs in rounds 5 through 7, and he predicts there's a definite 1,000-yard rusher in there because of COVID and the amount of players that chose to stay in school rather than opting for the draft during the past year or two with, COVID and all that good stuff. So do we have our eyes on a later round running back? I would say yes. Yes, we do. And then, of course, they are eyeing edge rushers and cornerbacks. And from there, he sort of explained their evaluation process. He broke it down into 3 categories when evaluating. At least that's what I got out of it. He said the first are prospects they love but will be gone by the time their turn comes, such as Aiden Hutchinson or Sauce Gardner. The second are those that they love but may have an injury or do 1 or 2 things really well but may have a more limited skill set within the Chiefs' overall scheme. All those things play a factor into their equation. And then you have the third, players they really like but are maybe later round guys. And he basically said this: the later the rounds, the higher the chances are that they are able to grab somebody that they love, which I already mentioned could be O-line and running backs, for example, or at least one running back. We all know how Brett Veach doesn't seem to value cornerbacks in the earlier parts of the draft, but he was asked if his evaluation on corners have changed this year looking at this year's draft and how he'd compare that with the need of defensive ends. Brett basically explained in depth their process of why corners haven't been as high on the draft board in recent years, and he said it's more 90% circumstantial than anything based on where their picks have landed, like in the later rounds, background checks, scheme fit, among other factors. But he did say this year he views corner as high of a priority as defensive end, and he wants to get better at both aspects. His answer to me, though, it didn't really say they were going to be drafting a corner earlier than they have in the past, not necessarily. He's just aware that it's a big need, and with all the draft picks they do have, I'm sure they're going to land on a couple of good corners that'll fit nicely into Spags' system. Same with the D-line with Joe Cullen and company. Veach also mentioned that they've been staying in constant contact with Patrick, and his feedback is also playing a role into how they are viewing the draft.
I know he has a group of guys down there in Texas working out with him every day, so we're able to talk about some of the stuff he's seeing. Obviously, we know some of the guys like the Kelseys and the Clydes and what they look like, but just his input on the Rojos and the Jujus and the Valdez-Scantlings, how they're doing, how they're coming along, is great for us in regards to the draft and how this thing's coming together and what he's thinking. So the dialogue's been there. He understands broad ideas and concepts and draft picks, and there's a lot of times he sounds like Clark, like, let's just keep all of our picks, you know. So.
And I found this interesting, even though reporters did laugh, because is that where Mahomes is also leaning this year, keeping the draft picks and getting youth and depth around him? I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of those conversations between Mahomes, Coach Reid, and Brett Veach. Either way, I think it's pretty awesome, the relationship that Mahomes has with Coach Reid and Veach, and I do think they take his feedback and opinions seriously. I do, however, want to say this. Everything I just talked about in this video, we may need to take with a bit of a grain of salt, because Veach was asked,
how much should media and fans believe when they hear coaches and GMs? How much should we believe?
As far as what to believe, I mean, I wouldn't believe anything. Yeah.
So yeah, definitely take this entire interview as you will. I'd like to think he was sincere in most of his answers, but he's not going to show their full hand to the public. It's smokescreen season leading up to the draft. But be assured of this. I will make sure to keep all of you updated every step of the way here on this channel. So make sure to sub for more daily news like this, and check out this video here from the previous day's news in case you missed it. So until next time, let's go. Let's go. How about those